What do you think is something that has been a result of a seed that you planted that you maybe didn't expect?
There are things that are happening to me right now that I would put under that. Um, and I don't know. I think that there are things, I think that if you have faith um in a higher power in generality, or like, I think that sometimes coincidences are like, you can almost just play them off, like, oh, this happened and then that happened and then, like, it just happened. Like, you can kind of play that off. And I think that, if you say there is a higher power that kind of has this path that's kind of guiding things in one way or another, and has this giant plan that's all working together towards an end, right? Um, then I think that the real answer to that question is probably there are a lot of them that I don't know or understand, or, like, it's hard to point to those because we're not as cognizant of those things as we could be, or you know what I mean? Like, I think there are a lot of things that happen that, like, we probably don't see and don't ever recognize, or don't ever turn back to something and be like, oh, this was because of that. You know what I mean? Um, and I also think that it's really hard to answer that question because our timelines are so weird in terms of expectation, of where it's like, if you do something or you give something and and it's on fertile ground and you're expecting something back, it doesn't, I think that spiritually, faithfully, it doesn't work the same way that a farmer does. When you plant corn, you know how that corn seed works. You know that it's going to sprout after X amount of weeks. It's going to grow after X amount of weeks. And this is when the harvest is going to be. Like, they have it down to like a science, right? And that's how we want our lives to be. That's how I want my life to be. I feel like it would make things easier. But supernatural things don't work that way. And so, something you could have done something, you could have been giving time to a church 9 years ago, and then through some weird weave of something's happening now because of that.
And it's also like, what do we learn through the act of giving? How has that changed you as a person? That'll inform your decisions. Like, going through it's. I know the question was directed to you, but I was like, even in myself, trying to think about that, and like, it's easy to default to anytime you gave somebody money to like help them out of a situation or to fund a project or whatever. But even from a spot of like, when did you just invest time in somebody that most people weren't,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't paying attention to them,
Yep.
and just get to know somebody, and like, you don't know what the the return on that seed might be. The fact that that young man that was a teenager now is a kind of pretty healthy, functioning adult that cares about people and is able to interact socially because somebody made them feel seen for the first
Right.
time. So it's like, sometimes we don't we like, again, we have this idea of like, well, if I sow seed, then I get to collect the fruits. It's still a very like, but really it's like, sometimes it's not even for us. It's just,
Right. And I also think it's really interesting because I've heard pastors speak before on, like, using the sowing and reaping of, like, farmers don't plant apple seeds expecting oranges. Like, you plant apple seeds expecting apples. And so, if we're looking at this like natural law of sowing and reaping, then if you give time, or you give, like, to a person, then, like, time or relationship is what's going to be returned. Like, the same thing will be returned back to you.
yeah.
And
I don't know. I'm wondering if there's anything, I mean, again, biblical that would support that besides just an actual story about farming.
right, I've heard this spoken about before. And if there is biblical supportation, so I don't know, whatever
Support.
biblical support for that, or if it's what you believe.
Supportation is kind of better.
Right.
That's good.
It also gets really interesting there because that spending time with somebody who really needs this can, like, that can lead back to just like this crazy relationship that came out of nowhere that could, like, I don't know. It's wild when you think about the impact of different things.
Mm-hmm.
You guys ever seen the movie Butterfly Effect?
Ashton Kutcher.
I'm familiar with the
You were
I mean,
idea.
it's been a while.
When did it come out?
It's been a while.
Do you think 2004 or before? I think it was before 2004.
2004. I would have been. No, it was probably right around there. Honestly, I would go a year, maybe.
2004.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But this idea of like one very small decision can impact things in a really big way. And I think that if you look at that or attempt to look at that on like a supernatural level of the way that God moves, of something really, really little can turn into something crazy.